Tonight, Paul Manafort back in federal court and headed to prison, now looking at more than 7 years in federal prison. Former federal prosecutor joins us to discuss the importance of that, plus other major developments related to the Mueller probe. Plus more fallout from that college admissions scandal. A leading admissions expert will join us to walk us through how the process works or doesn't work and how could this have happened. Then President Trump keeps bragging about the economy, but he's ignoring some of the problems and warning signs. We aren't. We'll explain. Good evening and welcome to RFL. I'm Andrew Whitman in for Richard French. Paul Manafort making yet another court appearance today, and a federal judge slapped him with a sentence that'll keep him behind bars until he's close to 80. Paul Manafort sentenced to an additional 43 months, nearly 8 years in prison total, when combined with his earlier sentence in Virginia. Sitting in the D.C. courtroom, the judge deciding the 69-year-old will spend 3.5 years behind bars for crimes including conspiracy, obstruction of justice, and money laundering, crimes he pleaded guilty to as part of a plea deal with special counsel investigators. Prosecutors say he then violated that deal by continuing to lie to them. The time includes his conviction for witness tampering. Leaving court, his lawyer was disappointed.
Such a callous, harsh sentence that is totally unnecessary.
In court, Manafort read from the same statement he gave the judge in Virginia, telling Jackson, "My life personally and professionally is in shambles. This is an ordeal I am responsible for. I ask for your compassion." And while he received compassion from the president,
I feel very badly for Paul Manafort. I think it's a very sad situation.
The former Trump campaign chairman's lies clearly troubling to the judge, telling him, quote, "Saying I'm sorry I got caught is not an inspiring plea for leniency." And she emphasized that while this case is not about Russia collusion, she called Manafort's attorney's citing of the non-collusion mantra a non sequitur. Minutes after his federal sentence was handed down, Manafort was then indicted in New York on state charges, including mortgage fraud and conspiracy. So even if President Trump pardons Manafort for those federal crimes, if convicted, he could still go to prison on the new state charges. And joining us now, former federal prosecutor Barrett Berger. She's now the director of the Center for the Advancement of Public Integrity at Columbia Law School. Barrett, Paul Manafort sentenced to an additional 3.5 years in prison, now facing more than 7.5 of total time. Your reaction to the two sentences, last week's and this one's?
Yeah, I think one of the most striking things for me about the two sentencing proceedings was you heard a very different tone today than you had from the Eastern District of Virginia. Remember, in the Eastern District of Virginia, Judge Ellis, went out of his way to sort of say that Paul Manafort had lived an otherwise blameless life, and he talked about how the special counsel's office. He had mentioned a lot of these things during the trial as well, that the special counsel's office was overreaching on some of these things. Today, you heard a very different tone from Judge Jackson. So she really took pains to shoot down this idea that Paul Manafort was in any way a victim. She said the crimes that he had been convicted of were very serious. And then she really harped on this idea that he had not at any point showed sufficient remorse, and that all of his actions up until that point sort of demonstrated the opposite, that he was trying to fight this, trying to game the system. So I think it was a really striking difference in the tone of the proceedings. And obviously, Judge Jackson really hit him with a very serious sentence today.
But Manafort did apologize in court today, and there's been some chatter that he got a lighter sentence because of it. And then also there has been some chatter that part of the sentence is going to run concurrent with those cases out of Virginia, another part doesn't. Should an apology really matter in this case, and why not just run the sentences consecutively?
So two different questions. So your first question, does an apology matter? I think the answer is absolutely. I mean, for each judge, it may matter more or less depending on who that judge is. But in my experience, from most of the judges that I appeared in front of, they wanted to see remorse at the time of sentencing. They wanted, it wasn't just a matter of a defendant saying sort of magic words, saying I'm sorry, but not really feeling it. They wanted to, have some confidence that the defendant knew what they had done was wrong, and to have the confidence that this defendant was not going to do this again in the future. There would be a low risk of recidivism. And I think that, Judge Jackson alluded to this today. She said that his risk of recidivism was probably pretty low. And look, he did apologize today. I think that counted for something. But as Judge Jackson pointed out, much of what he did during this case happened after he had already been arrested, right? All of the witness tampering charges happened post-arrest. So much of his actual conduct seemed to undercut the idea that he recognized how serious it was and that he felt badly about the crimes. Now, to your other question about, why run the charges concurrently versus consecutively, I think this is all a matter of where she wanted, the ultimate number to end up here. So the judge has full discretion as far as how to actually structure the sentence. She couldn't go above 10 years, but she had a lot of discretion within that 10 years, as to where she wanted the ultimate number to go. I think she went about this very methodically. I think she was very careful to, talk about the sentencing guidelines, to talk about what factors, what aggravating and mitigating factors she was that were playing into her sentence. So I think she did a good job following the law here, and I think ultimately she decided that, in her view, 7.5 years in prison was a good, sufficient sentence for him, and that's where she ended up.
I'm sure you've heard some of the complaints of people who look at the severity of what Manafort did and think to themselves, or saying out loud, 7.5 years feels like less time than a criminal whose crimes were far less significant. How would you respond?
I mean, they could be right. I mean, I certainly had many cases of people who had committed much less serious crimes and got more than 7.5 years in prison. So I think this certainly should spark a conversation about, how we sentence people, what factors are taken into account. I mean, I will say this judge today appeared to be very thoughtful in her determinations, so I don't know that I could really quibble with, the way she went about it. And look, with every case, I think reasonable people can, at the end of a sentencing, disagree on what the final number should be. There is sort of no magic formula for determining this, but this was a judge that appeared to be, taking this very seriously. She was very thoughtful and methodical. So I don't think you could make an accusation that, she disregarded the law or sort of didn't do her duty in sentencing him, whether you like the outcome or not. I think she did what she was supposed to do during the sentencing proceeding.
And then what felt like just seconds after the sentence was handed down for Manafort, Manhattan DA Cy Vance today indicted Manafort on state felonies, mortgage fraud, and other charges. They are the first charges outside of Trump's ability to pardon. I'm curious how significant a factor or how significant you think that is, and how you would respond to critics who say, boy, charging him on the state level is like double jeopardy and politically motivated.
Yeah, all right, the hits keep coming from Manafort today. I mean, it was an interesting decision to sort of make public those charges today. But certainly, he appears from the indictment, appears to have committed some pretty serious crimes here. So he's been charged with several different types of fraud related to, mortgage schemes and then falsifying business documents. So in New York, if you falsify business documents, but you do so on behalf of another crime that you're committing, that can be a felony as well. So he is facing serious time in the state now. And as you mentioned, the state crimes are not within the president's pardon power. So he would not be able to get out of them. And as far as, why the Manhattan District Attorney decided to charge him now, I don't know. I mean, certainly it does seem like, there may have been some sort of a political side to this, but it's important to remember the, district attorney is an elected position. So, he does have to run for re-election. There is always, obviously, he can only indict people that have actually broken the law, but it is not totally an apolitical position that he's in.
And then I want to shift over to Michael Flynn, because there was a bit of a surprise in the court filing in his case today as there was a status report on his sentencing. His attorneys wanted delay, saying another Mueller-related case in Virginia is not done yet. Mueller's office, which would normally, from what I understand, say like, yeah, we don't need him, so don't sentence him yet, didn't say that, and they took no position. They also said that while he could testify or cooperate more, his cooperation is otherwise complete. What does that mean, both for Flynn and for the Mueller investigation? Is that an indication that he's milked Flynn for all he can?
Yeah, I think that's exactly what that means. I think it means that the special counsel's office does not think that Flynn has any additional information to give them. So they have met with him a lot. They've gotten all of the details that he knows, and they are ready to have him sentenced. With all cooperating witnesses, there's always the risk that there is some court proceeding later on after you have a cooperating witness sentenced in which that cooperating witness's testimony would be valuable. So I think that's always sort of a tension between, when do you have somebody sentenced. But here, I think they're saying the risk of not having him available to testify is low, and so according to where they see the case right now and where they see the investigation as a whole, they're ready to kind of be done with Flynn.
And finally, Barrett, any conclusions from, well, you've already mentioned about Flynn, but any conclusions from Manafort's stuff today about Mueller's status, how close he is to completing his work, or what else he might be after?
Right. If only we had that crystal ball to see the future. Again, it's reading tea leaves. I couldn't possibly make a prediction. However, there does seem to be signs that this is wrapping up. Certainly, them saying that they are ready to have some of their cooperating witnesses sentenced, getting this final chapter of the Manafort case done. I mean, I think all signs would kind of point to this being wrapped up, but it's not over till it's over, so I don't know that any of us can actually know.
Barrett Berger is a former federal prosecutor. She's currently the executive director of Columbia Law School's Center for the Advancement of Public Integrity, and goodness knows we could use more of that these days. Barrett, thank you very much.
Absolutely. Thank you.
Up next, a college admissions expert joins us to talk about that big scandal yesterday, the one that resulted in nearly 50 arrests, including 2 actresses and other wealthy and famous people. Is this yet another example of the haves trying to get what they want at the expense of the have-nots?